Hello and welcome to episode 214 of the Board Game Barrage podcast. My name is Mark. I am the green tank. And joining me, as always, are my fellow tanks, Nealon the orange tank.
Hello.
And Kellen the red tank.
How do you do, sir?
I'm doing well. How are you guys doing?
Pretty good.
It's a long weekend.
Oh, is tomorrow a holiday?
Yeah, it's President's Day.
Is it? Okay. I had no idea. I completely lost track. Well, happy
Is President's Day a specific president, or is it just the day for all presidents?
It's the day for all presidents, but there used to be a Washington's Day, I'm pretty sure.
Ah,
Is that right? I think there used to be a Washington's Day and a President's Day, and then they combined them,
interesting.
coalesced into one grand day. So what are you going to do for President's Day, Nealon?
Draw up a list of all my favorite.
Well, yeah, that's what. So yeah, before you get into this, by popular demand, we put a call out last week at boardgamebarrage.com/feedback for people to tell us what they wanted from the show, and we got a ton of really great responses, and we have taken them to heart because one of the biggest things that was asked for is the return of the Bob. 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 And so today we are doing a BGBBOB for the best combat systems. So what BGBBOB is, for those who aren't familiar, is we throw whatever topic we are talking about. We each submit a couple of games that we think best fit the category into the PubMeeple ranking system at pubmeeple.com. And then we just have them go head-to-head live on the show, and we debate them in a head-to-head competition thing. So two games will come up. We'll argue for them. Whatever game gets the most votes from us will progress. And then at the end, we'll have an ordered list of the game that we think is the best in class all the way down to, in this case, 12th place. In honor of the return of BGBBOB, Nealon, why don't you give us your presidential rankings?
Sure.
Start with the newer ones.
Yeah. My favorite recent president is...
Ooh, controversial take, Nealon. I think I'm going to have to beep that out.
Yeah, maybe don't let that make it to the episode.
Yeah, I would never have guessed. So Bob is coming up soon, but before we bring Bob back into the room, we are going to be talking about the games we played. Nealon is going to be talking to us about Seven Wonders Architects, the latest in the Seven Wonders series of games. I'll be following up with Feld's newest, Kokopelli. And finally, Kellen will close us out with Canopy. So Nealon, why don't you...
have taken to the trees, or...
Kellen will take us to the trees, as he always does with Canopy. Kellen giving us that bird's eye view, or that monkey's eye view.
Thank
up in the
you.
trees with Canopy.
It wasn't meant to be literal. You figured it out after the fourth time.
All it takes me is 4 tries. Nealon, how many tries will it take you to tell us about Seven Wonders Architects?
Oh, at least 6.
Okay.
So Seven Wonders Architects is a new family version of the Seven Wonders franchise, if you will, which has had the Seven Wonders game with a bunch of expansions and Seven Wonders Duel, all of which are basically card drafting games where what you are drafting are either resources, which you can use to build buildings and eventually your wonder, or culture, or science, which typically in every game is, if you collect enough of specific sign symbols, will give you some sort of esoteric reward. Traditionally, the way that this manifests mechanically is different in each of these games. Seven Wonders is pretty much a straight pick and pass card drafting game. Seven Wonders Duel is a 2-player version where you're picking cards from an array, and as you pick a card, it reveals other cards and so on. And Seven Wonders Architects takes this formula and sort of reduces it even further, where you are picking from one of 2 piles to either side of you. Or you can pick blindly from the top of a shared deck. So imagine that there's a pile of cards between every pair of players, and then you're going to reveal the top card of each of those piles and take from either side or top deck from a shared deck in the middle. So there is the consideration that is shared by all these games is what can I use versus what can my opponents use. That is the basis of a drafting system. So you're considering your neighbors in Seven Wonders Architect. Can my neighbor to my left use this wood in order to build their wonder, or is it better if I take it from them? But the complexity of what you can use all of these cards for is also drastically reduced. Typically, in order to build your wonder, what you're looking for at any given time is either between 2 to 4 resources that are different. So if I get wood and then a stone and then brick, because I fulfilled the next condition to build the next stage of my wonder, I must immediately build the next stage of my wonder. I sometimes get a reward and the game moves on. There's also military cards where you get temporary military points, and if you get military cards that advance the military track using these horn symbols, once that fills up, then you trigger a war around the table. Every player looks at their neighbor, and if you have more military points than your neighbor, you're going to get some victory points. And then that resets the war. And then there's the aforementioned science, where if you're going to get 2 of the same science symbol or 3 different science symbols, you get to pick a science reward, which is going to grant you a special power or some special way to get victory points. Finally, there are just cards that are straight up victory points, as well as one that lets you peek at the top card of the shared deck. But that's kind of the gist of it. The game pretty typically just boils down to this very simple choice of, do I want the card on my left, or do I want the card on my right, or am I just going to risk it and take the shared card in the middle? And I think that kind of sums up all of the interesting choices that there are to be made in Seven Wonders Architect. It's cute. I think it's a fine family weight game, but it feels extremely reductive to a fault. Mark, you've also played Seven Wonders Architect. What did you think of it?
Yeah, I'd be curious, Neil, did you play the digital implementation or the physical?
I've played only on BGA.
Okay, so I've played both. I think the game, as you mentioned, is super, super simple, to the point where I do enjoy this game on BGA because it is light in terms of the necessity to like really engage your brain. This is a game where, you know, if I'm working on something on the computer and I want a 5-minute, 10-minute break, I will play a game of it on BGA and just like click, 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 and the game's over sort of thing. Again, I also played a physical copy of this, and that was too much for what you were doing.
Yeah.
I mean, the components are great, the packaging is great, everything is great in terms of the production, but it's just like, for as well produced as it is, and for as easy it is to put away because they've really done well in terms of the packaging, it's just too much setup time for a game where the choices are so trivially simple. So playing this in the same way you would play an app game on your phone, where you're standing in line and playing it real quick, it's like analogous to that. I've never played Candy Crush, but it strikes me as something like Candy Crush, where it's like more or less brainless, but fine. It's fine.
Excuse me? We're going to have to put in some asterisks here. We're going to have to put an asterisk. You referencing Candy Crush.
Okay.
I own Candy Crush.
You own Candy Crush? You're
Yes,
Mr. Crush?
the company I work for.
Oh, okay.
First
No
asterisk.
offense.
This is not official guidance.
Yeah, the thoughts and
Views expressed herein
views
are
expressed
not
by my Mark do not at all coincide with those of
Kellen's ownership of
Kellen
Candy
or
Crush.
Activision Inc. or whatever. Anyhow, so yes, I would say this is great to play on BGA if you're looking to pass a few minutes, but I have a hard time recommending it as a let's set it up on the table production.
Wait, I'm confused though. Okay, in Seven Wonders, everyone is simultaneously drafting cards. In Baby's first Seven Wonders, you're choosing the left card or the right card.
Yeah, so it's rotating around the table.
Oh, you're
taking
not
turns
drafting.
in clockwise. No.
What?
So you're picking from a pile that's shared between you and your neighbor. So
Yes.
if you take the top card, and this is maybe
they
the
have a
worst
different
thing about it. Exactly. If you take the top card from them, then you might be exposing to them a better card. So it almost like nullifies some of that whole thing.
Another thing that's frustrating about it in terms of like lack of choices, as Neelan said, you have the choice between the card on your left, between you and your left neighbor, and the card between you and your right neighbor, and then there's this blind stack. And if you have the power, you can peek at it, but it's just so obvious to be times where you just pick the blind one because who cares?
I would say in the times I've played this on Board Game Arena, I've probably just picked blindly 70% of the time. And it seemed like the best thing to do.
Absolutely, yeah. Exactly.
I am just confused. I think Mr. Antoine Bauza has not researched parallel play, in which we learned that babies enjoy playing games together at the same time. And you're saying that this game has changed the rules.
Exactly.
I'm actually surprised because in my mind, when you make a new version of, I don't know, a reductive Seven Wonders, you still have to take turns at the same time. That was like the core of Seven Wonders when I got into the hobby, and Seven Wonders was super hot. And instead, they've ported the art?
Not even. It's like cartoonified art as well. But Seven Wonders Duel always already broke that format a little bit But still, I agree with you. Like, this doesn't really feel like Seven Wonders, except in terms of, oh, hey, you'll recognize the resources, you'll recognize the science, and you're building a wonder. I guess crucially that's worth, once someone builds a wonder, the game is over. So it's a little bit of a race, but yeah, again, the decisions are so inane. And Mark, to your point, what was funny is as I was describing the game to you, I was trying to picture it in terms of the physical versions. Wait, that means you'd have to pick and then reveal the top card.
Yeah.
Like, that sounds so tedious.
Yeah,
Like, even just imagining the physical version sounded like horrible to me.
Yeah.
So I don't know. This
You're
is a
not a
huge
baby.
miss. You're right. This is a huge miss for me. There might be some appeal for this for younger gamers or families, but I just think there are better family-weight games out there. That is Seven Wonders Architects.
That said, I can see myself playing it again on BGA just because it's so fast and it's so brainless that if you just want to pass the time, I think it works in that respect.
It's
Is that,
just like
is that a
what's-
resounding approval? there?
Yeah, it's like soda's like popping like bubble wrap.
Yeah, sure. How much bubble wrap can you pop? Sometimes you get bored of popping bubble
Right.
wrap. This is the alternative. So, Kellen is a huge innovation fan, and Neelan is a huge Stefan Feld fan, as we've always said.
Yep.
So, when I got a chance to play Kokopelli, the latest game by the aforementioned Mr. Feld, that promised to be a Feldian take on innovation, I thought to myself, is this the game that'll finally bring the two together? Is this the game that unites the red and orange tanks?
The cover art would concur, Mark, with what you're proposing here. Mixture
How's
of red
that?
and orange.
Oh, that's correct. That's correct. The cover art is red and orange. So in Kokopelli, you will start with, at least the base game, 16 base decks. So 16 types of decks. And you're going to pick 12 of them randomly, or you'll choose them. And then each player will have a deck that is constructed of those 12 types of cards. So you'll pick 12 types of decks. Each deck has 3 cards each. So each player will start with the same 36 card deck in their own player color. And in front of you, there are going to be 4 places on your own personal tableau to play those cards. So on your turn, you have one of just a few different choices. You can draw a card, which gives you more cards into your hand, but also acts as the timer for the game, because once anybody extinguishes their personal deck of cards, the game will end. The other thing you can do is play one of your cards to the spots on your board, which is called starting a ceremony. So you play one of the 12 types of cards onto a spot in front of you that'll begin a ceremony. And what that means is you have now activated a power that will give you some sort of advantage as long as that ceremony is in front of you. When it comes to playing ceremonies in front of you, though, you can only play ceremonies that you have not already started. So if I want to play the orange ceremony card in front of me, I cannot have already started it somewhere else on my own personal board, and it cannot be on either your left or right neighbor's 2 closest spaces to you. So there is an idea where you will start a ceremony, you'll start playing a suit of cards in a certain location, because you know if you play it there, it'll block the opponent to your left or your right from starting that same ceremony. The other thing you can do is you can continue a ceremony by playing the same suit on top of a previously open suit. So if I play that orange card that, say, gives me a point whenever I play one of my wild cards, I can play another card on top of it. What that will do is take it one step closer to scoring. Once you've played 4 cards on the same ceremony, that ceremony is closed, and you will then score points for being the first person or second person to close a suit out. So going to the previous example, if I started the orange suit and I've now played my 4th card on that will close the suit, and if I'm the first person to close a orange suit, for example, I will take a token from the center of the board there that will give me a certain amount of points. That acts as another timer in the game once a number of suits have been closed by the collective players around the table. That will also trigger the end of the game. You can also play these continuing ceremony cards on your opponents, again, to your left or right. So if your opponent on your left, for example, has opened a ceremony that is giving them a power that they're really taking advantage of, you can play your cards instead of starting it for yourself. You can play it on their tableau in an effort to try to end their suit early. And in addition, if you play a card on their tableau that closes the suit, you are the one who gets the points for closing the suit, not your opponent, even though they're the person who started that suit. And that's basically all you're doing in the game. You're drawing cards, you're playing them to activate powers, and then you're trying to close these powers in an effort to make point grabs, and do that until one person either has gone through their deck or enough suits have been completed by the collective amount of players, and you count up your victory points, and that's it. I was very excited, as I mentioned, at the idea of a Feld take on innovation, and certainly you can see why the comparisons are made. The different suits have different powers, and they will give players an edge. Like one suit, for example, allows you to complete ceremonies using just 3 cards instead of 4. One suit allows your wild cards. Each player has a certain number of wild cards. They will double the strength of your wild cards. Another suit will make it so that instead of playing on a few of your opponent's ceremonies, you can play anywhere around the table. It opens up your options as to where you're playing your cards. Another card will let you draw a card anytime you play a card, increasing your efficiency of actions. So there's a lot of stuff like that. I was disappointed, though, that the powers that you get, although there is a variety, they weren't anywhere near as crazy as the powers you see in Innovation. I know there has been an expansion to the game already, and maybe that is where this is going. And for me, after playing this a couple times, I've enjoyed both plays, although not extraordinarily, but it just strikes me as a game that is absolutely screaming for an expansion, hopefully that takes it a step closer to these Innovation, more exciting, more swingy powers. You have both played this. We played this at PAX Unplugged. Did it bring you together? Do you feel closer to the other tank after playing Kokopelli?
I wouldn't call what we did together Kokopelli. But it did bring us together, sharing a hotel room at PAX Unplugged. Yes, so Kokopelli is a weird one, and I was trying to grok as you were explaining it, like whether I thought someone else could understand how the game plays, because it's one that you get 3/4 of the way through the rules, and you still don't really understand how it plays. There's like this take-thatty-ness to it, but it combines in a way that feels more salady in terms of like you're almost always close to getting points and everyone's scoring little bits of points here and there. I liked this a lot, was my hot take, but it is again like lukewarm Carl Chudiak, which is to say that Mr. Chudiak, and in some ways I think maybe even Glory to Rome is a little bit of a better comparison, though the powers in Glory to Rome are insane as well. These powers are not wild, let's just say, even though I think one of the powers is related to wild cards, but neither here nor there. Like I enjoy Kokopelli. I would like to play it more. The production is weird, as it always is from Queen Games, where you're like, these boards, I don't know what's going on. I believe the Kickstarter came with the expansion, and you do not use all the cards, right? You use like 10 out of
12 out of 16.
12 out of 16 in the base, and then there's like an expansion with 9 more. It's very tactical. I don't feel like you can have a super long-term game plan, and there were times where I felt pretty annoyed at some of the combos that you guys were making, that I was like, of course I'd want that combo if I could get that combo, though that is how people feel when they play Innovation often for the first time. And I thought that it was particularly clever in the way in which that half of your tableau corresponds to one player and the other half to the other player. So there's that like little bit of, oh, I'm okay over here, but I actually can't play this card on this side of my tableau because Neelan already has that one open. So more interactive as well than I was expecting. So definitely one that I'd be more than excited to explore more.
Yeah, I thought that this was particularly clever at having played at the 3-player account, and it did make me wonder how different it would be at 2 and 4, because what's cool about the 3-player accounts, as you can imagine, you have everyone at the table is one of your neighbors. So everyone is affecting everyone else, which wouldn't be the case strictly in a 4-player game. Like the player opposite you is very much out of your reach, and 2-player would maybe feel, I don't know if something changes at 2-player, but 2-player would just feel maybe a little bit too back and forth zero-summy. But at 3 players, I thought this was really, really cool. I liked it a lot as well. Like, I was instantly intrigued by the idea of, okay, how does this game change knowing the cards that are in it? Like, knowing the combinations that are able to be made and the combinations that aren't able to be made, how does that vary up your strategy from game to game? I liked the decision of, do I want to start a ceremony that's right next to Mark, knowing that he might be able to snipe it from me, or do I want to give it slightly more protection, or do I make that same consideration based on what's going on Kellen's side of the board? Like, it's a consideration of both of your neighbors' powers in order to determine where best to position your ceremonies. I liked that. I thought it was clever. It felt a little bit more than just find the combo and exploit it. There's a little bit more like positional consideration to it, which I thought was neat.
And to your point, Neil, and I'm looking at the BGG page, and the overwhelmingly recommended player count is 3 players.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And I've only played it at 3 players in the few times I've played it, and that makes a lot of sense. And so that is Kokopelli by Stefan Feld.
Neelan and I got a chance to play a review copy of a game called Canopy that I believe the Kickstarter is delivering right now. This game comes to us from Tim Eisner, who previously made March of the Ants, a very silly 4X game where you're playing as ants and riding. Was it a grasshopper that we rode?
Caterpillars, weren't they?
Caterpillar, yeah, that's right. With artwork by Vincent Dutray. So right off the bat, this game is absolutely gorgeous. From the cover art to all of the little animal tokens and artwork, it's very hard to not be charmed by the art. The central conceit of the game has shades of Throne and Grail and Coloretto. So fans of the podcast will say, what? This sounds like it might be right up Kellen's alley. So there are 3 hops, and in the first one is 1 card. In the second one is 2 cards, and then the third is 3. And so a turn goes like this. Mark, you get to look at the first hop. You look at that card and you say, do I want this? And if you do, you take it and your turn is over. Or if you pass on that, you add a new card to it, and then you go to the second one. You look at those 2 cards, decide to keep it, or put a new card and pass. Go to the third, same thing. If you pass all 3 hops, you get to just top deck a card and just put it in your tableau, and then it's the other player's turn. So that is the structure with which you are acquiring cards to your tableau. There are 3 rounds to the game, and ultimately there's a bunch of different types of cards that are positive and negative for your ecosystem. The main type of cards are tree cards, where you are building up a trunk. So you're either starting new trees or building up the trunks of your trees. And then once you get a Canopy card, which is a horizontal card, you must finish off a tree. So even if you don't want to finish a tree because you're trying to build the longest tree or the biggest tree, sometimes you have to if you get a Canopy card. And so that's an agonizing decision you're making. Like, I really want this poison frog and snake for my tableau, but I don't want a Canopy right now because I'm going to have to top off my tree. Should I pass on this and keep going? At the end of each round, certain things score, but not everything, and certain things stay and go away. So there are also a bunch of cool animals, and the animals have special powers. And then if you get a mating pair of animals, those will score victory points at the end of the game. A small amount if you have one, and quite a bit more if you have both of them. The powers are really cute. They're just fun. Neelan had a jaguar, so he was murdering my animals like a jackass. I had a snake, and I was able to steal cards even when I was passing one of the hops. So as I moved over to the next hop, I think Neelan had a poison frog that was allowing him to add additional cards before his turn, so he just had better hops from which to take. It is all very, very charming. Charming, 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 charming. The word is charming that we're looking for Canopy. I am convinced it's a little bit too much for what is a light family weight game. It goes on for maybe 10 minutes longer than I'd like it to, at 30 to 45 minutes. It is 2-player only. There is a 3 or 4-player variant or optional rules or whatever. There are a lot of interesting production choices made in Canopy, and I think some of them were done to be better environmentally friendly, which is cool, but also weird in some cases. There's like paper bags instead of any bags to store the tokens, which there are a lot of tokens. Rather than having any sort of cardboard space for the hops are just other cards. And so you're constantly we just got rid of them about halfway through the game because we were constantly having to pick them up. I find the core of this game exceedingly agreeable. I really enjoy the 1, 2, 3, your turn is over. I found the tableau building to be decent, fine, good, okay, charming. Canopy, Neelan, what do you think about it?
Yeah, I liked it. This is something we say a lot. It's hard when you have a core that feels familiar to something like a Coloretto, but that is a much, much simpler game. There's a much smaller box size, something you can break out with anyone. And Coloretto is a game that Kellen and I both like a lot in both of our top 50s. Canopy feels like that a little bit of, okay, do I take this or do I risk giving Kellen something he wants? But it layers on top of that so much point salad-y scoring. It's like, okay, now score your trees. Now get some seeds. Now do you have fires? Now do you have sun and water? Now your plants score. Do your wildlife? Do you have 2 pairs of wildlife? Does all of your wildlife score depending on whether you have the biggest tree? There's just a lot that's happening at the end of your round, and you have to be making these considerations, not constantly, but every time you're looking at a hand of cards, there's a little bit of, how does this fit into my tableau to maximize my scoring? And it just feels, while I found that fun, it almost belies the point of the game of being a fun, simple, light 2-player game. It did strike me, and I remember saying this afterwards, as a game that you could show in the same way that like stuff like Wingspan is hugely successful. You could show this to a non-gaming partner and there is instant visual appeal. It just screams out at you from the table because you're just building these trees and you're like putting little animal tokens on top of them and you have plants and plants of cards. It is just adorable. I mean, you know, Kellen said
the word you were looking for, Neelan, I said it like 17
yeah,
times
exactly. Sorry. But yeah, no, it absolutely is. It oozes charm, and I think that makes up for a lot of the deficiencies, which include a very traditional sin that we hate, which is constantly looking up what cards do in the rules reference because they didn't put the text on the cards.
Oh, that's a quote. Okay, but I think there are clever bits that we're not going to get to or haven't covered here. It's like you get 2 disease cards and it's bad for you. You get 3 disease cards and it's bad for both of you. So there's that push your luck, or the same with fire, where like you get 1 fire, you're not worried about it. You get 2 fire, and then suddenly you're on the hunt for the 3rd fire because now it's going to hurt Neelan. And so suddenly Neelan is taking fire. There are other cards like the Orchid, which is one of the advanced cards. And I actually called my mom after the game and I said to her, 'cause she does more like gardening than me, like, are orchids temperamental? And she's like, what? And I said, are orchids temperamental? And we had a moment where, yes, in fact, orchids are temperamental. We learned in the game, if your ecosystem has too much water or too much sun, the orchid dies and you don't score any points. But if it's under this ratio of those type of cards, your orchid will score at the end of the round. So I think this is one to check out. I think you should look at the artwork and say, yes, someone will like playing this. If you do look at the art and say that, then yes, someone you know will like playing Canopy.
I will also say this, like, I genuinely had fun the entire time. Like, we were like talking each other about stealing each other's animals and who was going to score and who wasn't. And it was silly, but it was the good sort of silly.
3 things. First of all, you guys are being real loose with the cursing given what happened last week.
Oh, sorry, Mark. I forgot. I was going to bring it up before.
Number 2, the art is unbelievable. I did not play the game that Kellen Neelan did, so I've just looked it up here on BGG, and it is amazing. Like, you know, a lot of people will say, buy the game for the art alone, and I rarely ever believe that. But this is actually a game where the art is making me interested in buying it, despite any other consideration. Number 3 is Coloretto with animals and like a little more complex. Zularetto, ever heard of it? But
Aquaretto?
Aquaretto, that's true as well. But Kellen, you were saying that you wish the game was about like 10 minutes quicker than it is. Just looking at the pictures here on BGG, there's a lot of pieces. There's a lot of stuff going on. Is it worth all this? I mean, you've already said that, Neelan said that he's enjoyed it, and you said that you would recommend it for people who like the art. But is it worth what looks like to be like a quite involved setup? I mean, it looks like there's a lot of stuff.
It's not too bad, but there's some weird production choices, and like even the victory points. I read online that some people just don't use the victory point chips because they're like bitty and kind of just annoying. Yeah, I think Neelan said it best. It's hard when we have these simpler card-based games that deliver like maximum value per minute or whatever, and Canopy fits in outside of a window that I personally would be willing to keep in the collection. But if I was playing with non-gamers often, or someone who I thought would really enjoy the theme, like, I would be excited to play this again with them. I'm excited to show it to Christina just for a one-time through. I think it'll get very mean very quickly, even though that's not really the purpose of it. And I think Wingspan is a good touch point as well, where it's like, do I like Wingspan?
Who can say? You could say. Perhaps you can say.
No.
Do you?
I can say. No. First of all. But I can't begrudge it, and I'm excited that it exists. I really, like, and again, people will not believe me. I'm excited that Wingspan exists. I really desperately am. Canopy fits more in that realm. I hope people check it out after listening to this little segment on it, and I think they will be pleasantly surprised. Like, and that core makes me smile. Like, I just like how simple the way in which you're getting cards to your tableau is. It immediately is gripping. You can hear it when you first explain it to someone. It's like, oh, this is nice. And in fact, it is fun. And that is Canopy.
Before we move on to BGB Bob, I just want to shout out the wiki at boardgamebarrage.com/wiki. We have a number of listeners who are putting in a lot of work making that just an incredible resource. I've been using it myself recently, trying to remember if I've talked about games in the past, and just wanted to shout out to the folks doing that. Particularly, I know CC Runner, who's on our Discord, has been a big proponent of that. So check it out at boardgamebarrage.com/wiki. Feel free to contribute your own information there. It's just been a thriving, really useful resource for just looking back and seeing what we've discussed, learning more about the community. It's just a wonderful resource.
One of the things I found invaluable just there on its own is just, like you said, the giant list of every board game we've covered ever, linking to the episodes that we've covered them. So if you're ever curious about, hey, have they spoken about this game? That is like your one-stop shop for that exactly that information.
All right. So on to BGB Bob. As I mentioned earlier, the way this works is we are going to be talking about the best combat system. So we each have come up with a list of our 4 favorite games in terms of combat systems. Not our favorite games in general, not our favorite combat games. Our 4 favorite, at least for me, our 4 favorite systems from games. And we are going to be throwing them on Pub Meeple, which ranks them 1-on-1. We'll be arguing our cases for the games we've chosen. And at the end, we'll have an ordered list. The most important rule, as always, when it comes to BGB Bob, is that if anybody says the phrase fire away, their vote is locked in and cannot be changed. So when somebody says fire away, that is their vote cast in stone. So without further ado, let's bring on Bob.
So just to be clear, these are the best combat systems in board games. These are not our favorites. I know Marcus said this. I just want to be very clear. Like, these are the combat systems in board games. So when we get to the end, we'll have a ranked list with the best combat system in a board game at number 1, all the way down to number...
All right, so the first battle is from Kellen, Risk.
Yeah, no, or Neelan exit the game, all of them.
Yes, it's Risk versus every exit game in the past and to come. Fight.
Including all advent
right.
calendars globally.
Okay, no, but the first battle is a red versus orange battle. It is Kellen's Diplomacy versus Neelan's Rising Sun. Kellen, talk about diplomacy.
All right, the combat system in Diplomacy is as pure as it comes. You cannot invade somewhere 1-to-1 without support. And the way that combat is resolved in Diplomacy is so beautiful because everyone writes it down. You write, my army in this location moves to that location. And then in order for that army to be able to move 1-on-1 into a fight, that army must be supported by someone else. So that other player must write, my army in this location supports the army in Kellen's location, moving to the location that he wants to move to. Meaning that you could lie to someone about where you wanted to move, or you could lie to someone and say, oh, I messed up writing the order down. But what I love about the combat system is how pure it is, how secretive it is, how it allows 2 beat 1, and 1 doesn't mean you die. I think a lot of combat systems are too punitive, and Diplomacy allows you to retreat. So it doesn't feel like everything is lost when you lose one of these battles. And it feels really cunning and conniving when you set up this weird, multifaceted movement support thing that allows everybody to get where they're going and fight. It is also quick. I like combat that goes quick. I would love to hear Neelan talk to us about how Rising Sun is quick.
That quickest of games, Diplomacy.
Oh, shut the up, Mark. Did you not understand the preamble I just made? Combat systems in board game. Oh, my God. You're already not going to follow the rules.
Combat is not quick. Combat is brutal and grueling, and Rising Sun only has 3 combat phases in the entire game, representing the grueling nature of fighting. What I love about Rising Sun's combat system is before the out of the battle, you know the order in which all the combat's going to roll out in each of your territories. The main currency you use for combat is the same currency you've been collecting throughout the prior phase of the game. And then you use that to bid on each battle in sequential order. But any money you spend on that combat goes to your opponents and can be used by them in subsequent combat. So there's this very deliberate consideration of how you're going to spend your money to best aid the flow of combats throughout. And then each of those little bids, they're like brilliant all on their own. So there's a bunch of different ways you can spend the money. Do you want to get victory points by sacrificing your people? Do you want to take hostages? Do you want to add to your strength of your army by adding Ronin? Only one person gets each of these benefits depending on how they want to distribute their coins, and that's a consideration of how many coins do I want to save back for subsequent battles? How many coins do I want to give away to my opponents knowing I might be fighting them again in the future? There are so many cool considerations that go into this system. I love it. I think it's almost like this whole sub-game in itself embedded into Rising Sun.
And that's exactly why it's terrible. Okay, Neelan, can I quote you? You have to figure out in combat how many coins you want to give away to the opponent during the combat. It's like they've buried all of the actions into the combat system, and you play like a 15-minute mini game that barely has anything to do with combat. I have another proof point. Eric Lang would even choose diplomacy because Rising Sun is literally based on diplomacy in his own words.
Oh, wow.
Think about that, Neelan.
This was a tough one for me. I do love the sort of simplicity of diplomacy, and I do like the sort of novelness of Rising Sun. Whenever I play it, that does strike me as an interesting aspect to it. I think I'm going to go with Rising Sun. Fire away.
Rising Sun,
Kelly,
fire
making
away.
a sweep? All right, we've got another battle of red versus orange here with Mage Knight from Neelan and Arcadia Quest from Kellen. Neelan, why don't you start us off this time?
Yeah, so the way Mage Knight's combat system works is... Mage Knight is effectively a deck-building game where over the course of any given turn, you have your hand of cards, and that's going to determine how far you're going to move and what you're going to be able to do to fight. And then as you're approaching a combat encounter, there is this very careful consideration of your hand. Do I think I can defeat what is likely to show up in this arena, as it were, with the cards I have in my hand? Because I have this ranged attack, I have this block attack, I have this, but you don't exactly always know where you're going to be fighting. Then you turn those discs over and you look at them and like, I have to deal with this much damage, I have to deal with this poison effect, and then it's a reconsideration of your hand to be like, okay, I'll start by using this card as a ranged attack, I'll then block the damage using this from this card, which will allow me to kill this. But there are so many different ways that you can reutilize that hand to mitigate damage or take damage at the expense of killing things. It's just this little puzzle that is so intricate and can be quote unquote solved in so many different ways, but there are always costs associated with every way you try to solve it. It's never just a clean sweep. It's really clever. It's the closest thing I've seen to a game replicating a combat puzzle by virtue of like the sort of the tactical video games.
I've not played this, Neelan, but it sounds a little bit like Gloomhaven in terms of the card, or is that not quite?
It is, but that plays out in one phase almost, because you make all of those decisions up front. It's not like a back and forth, and you're not really ever like die rolling to check a resolution. It's very deterministic. Once you've decided how the combat's going to go, that's how the combat's going to go. Yeah.
And this is solo.
I've actually only ever played it cooperative, but yeah, solo or cooperative. But in the context of the combat, it's you fighting the system, yeah. It's you against a board presence. Although I guess actually there are like player versus player combats as well.
So let's talk about Arcadia Quest, Mark, because you are who I have to convince, because Neelan just picked a solo game as having the best combat, which I think speaks for itself. Arcadia Quest is a trashy, fun dungeon crawly PvP game. Okay, so this game has other players in it and combat. And so in Arcadia Quest, the combat system is very similar to things that you've seen in the past, which is roll a lot of dice, defender rolls a lot of dice, attackers who are melee focused will hit on swords, and ranged users will hit on bows and arrows. And similar to defense, there are shields. It's that classic system that you have seen, but it has some wrinkles, and those wrinkles are great. One, it has the world's best combat mechanism, exploding crits, I think is what they call it. There is one part of the die that is a guaranteed hit, and when you get that guaranteed hit, you get an additional die. You get to roll that die. And you could roll for infinity in Arcadia Quest, and you could win any combat. It could be 1 versus 7. And if you are lucky enough, you always have a shot. Is it called Exploding Crits?
Dice.
Exploding Die?
Exploding
It's
dice,
like,
I think, usually.
yeah. Love it. Absolutely love it. It is so fun in Arcadia Quest. Arcadia Quest is that classic, trashy, roll the dice, things happen. But in addition to that, you have equipment and armor and weapons that modify what die you are rolling. In many games, you have no mitigation. In this game, it's like, well, if I want to be able to hit more often. I need to make sure that I have that sword, or I have that glove, or I have that trinket or talisman that automatically converts 2 of my dice to this. And Arcadia Quest is obviously a campaign game where each game will affect the next, where you're gearing up and speccing up, and you even have the ability to, like, in one campaign, this hero is really good at this thing, and then in another one, you're going to actually kind of go against what they're normally good at and make them good at this time. And so you build that story of what your character is good at fighting with over the course of an actual campaign, and people go, oh, I need to stay away from him anywhere close to short range, and I'm done. I normally do not defend the roll a bunch of dice and resolve, and spoiler alert, Cthulhu Wars is not on my list of best combat in a board game, but for what Arcadia Quest is trying to do, for how it resolves, it is a very good combat system in a very underrated game, Arcadia Quest.
I've mentioned before that I have not played Mage Knight, but I picked it up recently because I'm very excited to try it out. I'm getting into the solo stuff. So this is a very easy choice for me. I'm going Arcadia Quest far away. And you'll know why later on, but I'm definitely going Arcadia Quest on this.
Unfair. I want to point that Mage Knight is being maligned as a solo game. This is A, just discrimination against solo games, but B, it's a cooperative game as well. And the same system is used for player versus player combat. I reject.
Who are you combating?
I'm fine with that.
Other players.
No, you're combating the cardboard. You're not combating other players. Who are the other players?
Mostly you're combating the board. I'm not going to lie.
To be clear, this was not an anti-Mage Knight, anti-solo issue for me. This was another issue that will make itself clear later on in the list. We've got Neelan again with Eclipse, but I'll be taking him on this time with Chaos in the Old World. And I'm going to start this off because the reason why I voted for Arcadia Quest is the reason I added Chaos in the Old World to the list, and that is exploding dice. This is a combat system that I love. Chaos in the Old World does it as well. I would say does it better. There's no weird symbols to look at. All you look at is a 6. If you roll a 6, you get another die. Nice and easy. Do you got to play a big, long campaign that nobody's going to stick around for? No, you don't. It's a one-off game. Do you want to play on a board that is stretched out skin? Arcadia Quest doesn't give you that. Chaos in the Old World does.
Why are you talking Arcadia Quest? You're fighting Eclipse.
You ever seen
It's
Highlander?
in space.
There can only be one.
It's in space.
So I love the exploding dice idea. I think it, like Kellen mentioned, it gives you hope even if you're fighting a big army. There's always that chance that you roll the die that keeps on going, keeps on going, keeps on going. I think that, as is the case with a lot of land games, the combat is interesting but very simple. You get a number of dice based on the number of pieces you have in that battle. There's no difficult calculation to make. It's just how many dice do I get for this guy? How many dice do I get for this person? And then just get them and roll them. And if you get a 4, 5, or 6, you hit. Anything else is a fail. Nice and easy. The 6s explode. Beautiful. Beautiful, beautiful.
Eclipse is a spaceship 4X game, and similar to what Kellen was describing and what Mark's saying about the way that dice systems can be used cleverly, I think Eclipse does this really, really well. Eclipse is very much in the vein of just throw a lot of dice, but it divides it into like multiple phases, which I think are really clever. So you start off with each ship launching its barrage of missiles, and they only get to do this once, but this is like your big opening salvo, and it kind of sets the scene for the battle that's going to follow. Then every ship is firing off its weapons in initiative order, and it's just this repeated round of ships firing at each other, which is basically just this constant war of attrition until you decide to pull that fleet away. So ships are slowly disintegrating by class. One of the classes of ships pulls away. So you can just imagine this as this big space battle where you have all these different types of ships and they're all firing off their different weapons, and different ships are peeling off and pulling out of the fight until basically only one side remains. It just feels like this sort of brutal war of attrition as you're just constantly just firing on each other. And the best part about this is all of these ships are equipped with weapons that you have customized onto them specifically. So there is some ownership of the, oh man, these are my plasma missiles coming for you now. You're going to get wrecked because you didn't spec your ships to be able to defend against them. There's so much personality in the ships that comes across.
There is no chance that Kellen is going to go with Eclipse over Chaos. Come on, Kellen.
I have not played Eclipse.
Yeah,
Alex.
but even you know that the missile strategy is overpowered.
You're quoting me again, which I love.
I think they fixed that in second.
That's not what I hear.
For what it's worth.
They did. Okay, my question for both of you is, how long is a normal combat? Neelan, my concern, whenever games are too Euro-y, the dice just don't work, okay, for me. And so my gut is to go with Chaos because I have played it and I know that it does work. And Eclipse, it's like I actually didn't know it had dice, and it makes me question it just a little bit.
I guess my argument to that, and you may not like this answer because it's
The truth.
yeah, because it's the truth. But like Eclipse is a Euro-y game on average, but I think that the reason I like it is because it reminds me of the ways that Chaos in the old world is Euro-y. Like what you're looking at the board is my big fleet of ships versus your fleet of ships moving around the board, but the systems are Euro-y. And it's, to be fair, they're more Euro-y in Eclipse, but all I mean by that is it's not just move a person, plonk down the thing. Like, there is a resource and economy that evolves around the background. But yes, the combat system is definitely a lot of chucking a lot of dice. It definitely is, it's two people going at it for maybe longer than person 3 and 4 would care for, but it's such a beautiful system. It's such a beautiful combat
Eclipse
system.
has more than one people in it, right?
Yeah, this game is a
Kellen,
multiplayer game.
Let me make this easy.
Oh.
Okay, look. He's got opening salvos and he's got like phases and stuff. Okay, we're going to do a combat of Chaos and Old World right now. Kellen, in your mind, roll a 6-sided die.
Okay.
What did you roll?
Okay, done. What do you think I rolled,
Okay,
you idiot?
so you get an extra
6.
die. Now roll that die. What'd you get?
A 6.
Okay.
I rolled a hard 6
Roll
twice.
another
What
one.
do you think I am? Okay, oh my God, it's going to never end.
Perfect.
Chaos in the Old World, fire away. I don't stop talking.
Chaos and Old World, fire away.
Awful.
I want
All right.
to like Eclipse.
You will like it.
So now I've got to fight myself here. I've got Kemet versus Blood Rage. Okay, so I'll start off with the, I guess, third or maybe fourth even Eric Lang game to make our list. Blood Rage. We've had Rising Sun. We've had Arcadia Quest, I know he did some work on, and Chaos in the Old World. So this is the fourth Lang game to make an appearance. So the reason I love Blood Rage is the card drafting that you're doing at the beginning of every round is sort of the first part of your combat. And the thing I love about the draft is that all the cards seem so great. You have these cards that bring on monsters for your faction. You have cards that will buff up your leader, buff up your clan, that will give you cards that you can use in combat, and they all seem great. And so I love the idea of drafting these great cards, shaping your own army for both the strategy of that single age, because it's a 3-age game, and your long-term strategy. People have talked about the Loki strategies. Like, these are these cards that will give you points for losing, and it's a type of card that you'll be drafting round after round. So that's one thing that I love about it. I also love that you've got all these cards basically have to do with combat with few exceptions, and then after you draft your card, you're giving the cards that you didn't draft to your neighbor, and so you've got in mind, okay, I let that Loki-based card go. Now Nealon has it. If he picks it up, I might be more wary when it comes to fighting him. So there's that consideration to be made. So I love that aspect of the combat in Blood Rage. And then just when it comes to the combat itself, I just love how simple it is. You know, all these pieces have values from 1 to 3, except for one monster that has a strength of 4. You're basically just adding up the strength of all the monsters involved. Each player must play a card, which is another thing I like. Even if you don't have a card that adds to your combat value, you must ante up a card, and that is a very big consideration when it comes to tempo. I've been playing this recently, and there are times when you are reluctant to start a fight because even if you're going to win it, you know that you're going to have to give up a card in your hand that you might have been planning to use later, and I just love that consideration with Blood Rage. I love the simplicity of it.
Do you discard the card that when you win the combat, even if
if you lose, you get it back.
So 3 out of 4
But
years.
it's interesting because I've played where I know I'm going to win this combat, but I've got this monster card which I'm trying to bring out at the end of the round. But if I start this combat, or if I'm even dragged into a combat, I'm going to have to give it up. And that's just such an interesting consideration when it comes to tempo or the reluctance or willingness to partake in combat. Again, the combat is very simple to do. There's no dice rolling, so if you're risk averse or you don't like the randomness of dice rolling, Blood Rage offers that to you. So it's just a system that I really enjoy. And then the other game is the game I think that most people would bring up as one of the, granddaddies of combat-centric, classic Euro-ish games, Kemet. So Kemet is a game where combat is encouraged quite a bit. You only get victory points if you initiate combat. There's really no place to hide in Kemet because every spot is within striking distance of every place else on the map. I know that's Kellen's favorite aspect of it. You are crafting your own army based on all of these different cards and all these different buffs you can get. You can get buffs to your own abilities, but also you can just bring on these monsters. You can just buy monsters, and it's just really cool to have this giant, beetle or scorpion on your side, which is like so asymmetric from the other factions. There's also the combat system itself, which is everybody starts with identical hand of cards, and every time there's a combat, you have to play one card and discard a card, and each card has a value for attacking and defense and the number of casualties it will cause. And so there's the calculation, because you know what cards your opponents have, at least at the start of the game, because we all have the same cards, and you can look through your opponent's discard cards to get an idea of what they have potentially to play. So there's that, like the one-upsmanship, bricksmanship of that. So these are two of my favorite combat systems, without a doubt. Tough call for me. How are you guys voting on this?
Kemet, fire away.
Okay,
No, I'm just
so
kidding.
one of the things that I dislike in combat systems in general, philosophically, is when they separate winning from wounding. So it's like you can win this combat, but you're not going to hurt them very much, or you can not do as much towards winning, but you can hurt them a whole lot, which Kemet has a couple of cards that do that. And I just, for whatever reason, I don't like that additional layer to the calculation. It's not Kemet specific. I can't think of another couple of games off the top of my head. I know Heroes of Land, Air, and Sea also steals this system pretty directly from Kemet. And secondly, for whatever reason, when the game is out bluffing your opponent and what 3 cards they have, and your job is to outbluff them, it always feels closer to random rock, paper, scissors to me than it does like grand strategic gestures, which is odd because then I like games better where you just have a hand of random like Cosmic Encounter, which is just that, but like extrapolated outward. And I don't know how to like articulate that or defend that. I think Blood Rage is an interesting one. We were talking on the Discord about this, whether it's a blind bidding system. And I've always thought of it like it's a modify, like the combat cards are modifiers. It's like base strength to base strength. And then you might have a modifier card if you drafted it. And I have always enjoyed Blood Rage's combat for how quick it is. One of my choices that has not been revealed yet, in many ways feels comparable to Blood Rage. I think even Scythe, for its lack of combat, is also in some ways similar to Blood Rage. I think for me, it's got to be Blood Rage Fire Away, though Kemet does have a very good battle system, and my personal problems with Kemet are not really because of the battle system.
It's interesting, Kellen, because like I actually think that almost everything you said I feel the inverse of. I kind of like that twist in Kemet where you have to differentiate between victory versus winning the battle versus casualties, right?
It's a puzzle.
Yeah, but
you don't like
it
fighting,
is, but it's
rather do
also
a
like
puzzle.
a push your luck kind of system, right? Because the consideration is, okay, I can win this, but will I have any troops in the sector? And am I willing to risk that? Because I can play the card that gives me the defense I need to make sure I survive, but what's more important to mark? Is it more important to mark to hold the sector or to win this particular fight? It's like a battle versus war type consideration. And I like that a lot about Kemet. Whereas Blood Rage, I sometimes feel like the card play takes so much precedence over the constituents of your army, where it's like, okay, a strength 2 army versus a strength 4 army, but it's kind of moot if someone plays their +5 card that they drafted or something like that. I think that the times that I've been burned is not the right way, because it is a drafting system, and theoretically I had access to those cards and passed on them, or other people drafted them before me in favor of different cards. But I still sometimes just feel like more often than not, the makeup of my troops in the battle in Blood Rage is far less relevant than the cards that were drafted, which, that's the game that Blood Rage is. It's just, it always undercuts those combats for me a little bit.
All right, I'm going to go Blood Rage Fire Away. Done. All right, now it's Neelan versus himself. Neelan, you've already talked about Rising Sun. Now tell us about Neuroshima Hex.
Yeah. Oh, man. So, Neuroshima Hex, the way this works is on your turn, you're putting out a troop onto this hex-based board, and that troop has directions in which they fight. They have stats, abilities, strength, and then as you lay this out, you're building towards a combat phase that happens, but the combat phase sort of plays out in this very deterministic, almost kind of like the way that we've described Rumble Nation, where it's like this setup for this big war, and watching the battle unfold is so much of the fun of it. It's kind of like you could be like overly gamey and plan for every possible outcome of that, but there is to some extent to which working through every single iteration of the combat just becomes too much to do. So there is this process of, okay, I'm going to focus on what this troop is going to be able to do in this combat, and then watching that unfold is part of this joy of watching the system that you've wound up just kind of playing out. And then you see your troop iterating on plans you've laid out, ones that you've maybe miscalculated, and seeing that sort of just all net out across the entire board. I enjoy that every single time.
Callan, did you catch him bringing up Rumble Nation, appealing to your pro-Japanese bias?
Oh, yeah, he's trying to get to me. Well, a bias? What are you talking about? They just make the world's best trick takers. Neuroshima Hex lost a lot of luster when I tried it in app form, and I was like, wow, it can do all of this annoying this attacks that way with the hexagons all pointing different ways. I think that through all of your descriptions, Neil, and what you've revealed is how much like the more combat is like a puzzle, like the better off it will be. And I think Neuroshima Hex's system is like fascinating and interesting. Can you play Neuroshima Hex 4-player?
I think you must be able to.
It's got to get really wild.
Yeah, probably.
I think on the face of it, I feel more inclined to choose Rising Sun. But
yeah, it looks 2 to 4. Recommended at 4.
Well, and then can you be in a combat? And that's actually another philosophical question. Like, I want these combat systems to involve combat with more than just 2 players. I find I do not like it as often when it's 2 players having a side mission while the rest of the players are innocent standers by. I gotta go with Rising Sun here. I do like Rising Sun more than I give Neelan a hard time for disliking it. I think there's a lot of clever decisions that you make during a round of combat. Fire away.
Yeah, I guess I'm going to leave it with Neelan not to have to cut the bait. I'm going to go with Rising Sun. I like the sort of cloak nature of Neuroshima Hex, but I'd like the novelty bluffing of Rising Sun a little bit more. So, okay, Neuroshima Hex sticks around, but now it's going up against Diplomacy.
In some ways, not that dissimilar. Because it's the tightening of a spring that you're like doing all this anticipatory stuff for. And Diplomacy's battle system is in some ways very deterministic in the same way, where it's like you work through it in a systematic process and everything depends on what comes before. I am actually going to go against type here and say I think that the way that it works in Diplomacy is much more fascinating, because they are very similar in my mind, but the whole negotiation side of Diplomacy, like the winding up of that is you jumping between rooms, like trying to convince your neighbor to join you on a specific fight, and then watching that all play out together communally, I think is brilliant. It's the thing I love the most about Diplomacy, in fact.
Yeah, I think just looking at Neuroshima Hex in a 3 or 4 player board and like trying to parse ranged units versus who's pointing which way, wow, it looks like that would be a half-hour combat resolution. Again, not that bad, but wow, some of these pictures are driving me crazy here online. Like, Diplomacy at its core is very simple, and I think that illustrates why I like it. So for me, it's a Diplomacy fire away.
And it's going to be a clean sweep.
Neuroshima Hex is a cool one, though.
Yeah.
Like an alternate combat.
It's so clever.
All right, so Arcadia Quest makes its return for Callan, but I'm going to bring up King of Tokyo. Who would have seen that coming? Not many people. The thing I love about King of Tokyo is it takes sort of the meanness out of combat for people who don't like that part of combat. For those who don't know, King of Tokyo, you can either be the monster who is in control of Tokyo, or you can be not that monster. And if you are the monster in Tokyo, when you attack, it hits everybody. And if you're outside of Tokyo, when you attack, you hit the monster who's controlling Tokyo. And it's easy to teach. You know, you've got these big monsters, the deduction is there. But when it comes to the combat system, I just love the idea that do you want to be the king of the hill, which, you know, will give you points and give you benefits and is good for a lot of reasons. But then you're just going to have to take hits from everybody, either forcing you off or, you know, knocking your character out of the game. And so that's the thing I like about King of Tokyo, that it's your choice. Like, do you want to be the person who's getting the benefits but taking the hits, or do you want to sit out, though you're not going to be able to sit out there for long, or else you're not going to be able to reap the rewards of being the King of Tokyo?
Sounds like someone has never heard of Tokyo Bay.
What?
In 6-player King of Tokyo, there's 2 Tokyo spots.
Okay.
Tokyo and Tokyo Bay.
Same premise. Who's playing 6-player King of Tokyo?
No one should.
Right.
That's a fun fact for the audience. Please do not. Okay, this is hard, Mark. That is a fun idea, and I agree with you. That's like the best idea in King of Tokyo.
Yes.
Idea.
Okay. Combat system.
Yeah, but
what are we talking about here? We're talking about system. Neelan.
I don't know. It's so hard because I think, like Kellen, I can't separate the fact that I really strongly dislike King of Tokyo from.
I mean, first of all, King of Tokyo is not terrible.
I don't think I don't like it, but I think that the combat system is clever. That decision is the best part of how long can I withstand being the king of the hill versus being the person that's swatting at the king of the hill. I think that is very clever.
Also,
is it
Kellen,
enough?
King of Tokyo. You're going to vote against Tokyo?
Also, like
What was the other choice?
Arcadia Quest, 2 games with dice.
are you
One
kidding
of them
me?
which
Why?
has exploding
Kellen,
dice.
Kellen, this podcast is being published in Japan, so if you go against King of Tokyo...
Okay, the other thing, Mark, there's other cool bits about King of Tokyo with modifiers in your die rolls, but you have to play with a variant where everything is worth double energy or the game takes 5 hours. Arcadia Quest, fire away.
Nealon?
The thing that sort of sold me on how the way Kellen was describing Arcadia Quest, which is a thing that like just tickles my brain, is like the idea of established equipment that is sort of developing over the course of time. I love that. It's the thing I liked about what I described about Eclipse. This is my magical sword, and like I'm swinging at you. Like I don't even like King of Tokyo. Arcadia Quest, fire away.
Kellen, you had Nealon when you said campaign. That's what did it. I should have known.
Yeah, that's one of its core combat systems.
All right, so
the campaign.
Kellen, I think this is going to be up to you because it's King of Tokyo versus Mage Knight. We've already
King
said our
of
piece about the
Tokyo.
games. I'm not swayed by Mage Knight. I'm going to say King of Tokyo fire away. I imagine Nealon is not swayed by my King of Tokyo argument.
Okay.
Kellen,
Nealon,
let me tell you
okay.
about input versus output randomness.
Oh, you don't even think about that right now. Okay, but Nealon, how much does it feel... Again, because I'm doing some research for this, how much does it feel like a combat
Kellen.
situation?
I mean, as much as playing cards can, I think you're arguing against type in a way that's not very fair.
Kellen, did you already just
I
told
was
you?
the one who added Mage Knight to this list.
Does rolling dice feel like a combat? I don't know.
It's a thrill
like,
of the fight.
Is it a discreet
Rising up to
moment
the
where
challenge
you
of its life.
you prepare for the battle happens, and your heart rate elevates? Does your heart rate
Oh
elevate?
boy, when I pick that
during
card
a
out of
battle?
my hand and lay it down to the
It's
table,
elevated?
it's like beating out of my chest, Khaled.
Are you willing to wear an Apple Watch next time you play to
Yes, I am.
verify?
Nealon said that you pick your cards and then the combat just happens and you already know what's going to happen.
He verified that his heart. He's swearing an affidavit.
He has
He's
no
gonna
heart.
wear an Apple Watch.
I have a very weak heart, I should point out, but still,
Okay.
almost die every single time.
He says it goes up. I have to trust him.
Oh my
Mage
God.
Knight, fire away.
Are you kidding me? How could you? Oh my goodness. All right. Chaos in the Old World versus a newcomer. Well, not a newcomer, actually, probably one of the older games in this list. Kellen, tell us about Dune.
All right, we have arrived at my favorite combat mechanism in a game. Dune is in some ways similar to Blood Rage, in some ways similar to Scythe. You commit troops to a battle on the land of Arrakis. And again, there is some variance if you're using any of these advanced variants, advanced spice combat, blah, 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 it doesn't matter here. And then each player will select face down how many of their troops they wish to put into this combat. So I have up to 7, Nealon has up to 5. So ergo, if I want to guarantee the victory, quote unquote guarantee, because we're going to get to the modifiers, I must commit at least 5 of my troops. But by committing those 5 troops, they will be spent, they will die in the resulting combat. So it's a very structured system where you can see what is happening, but then you have to bid on how much strength you are willing to use. In addition to that, you add leaders, which are just fun. What leader are you willing to risk? Because they may die, they may go to the tanks. And then the rub there is that every player has these treachery cards where if they happen to have that exact card, this is the trump card, this is the exploding dice of the Dune universe, which is that even if you think you have overwhelming odds, you cannot win, if they use a leader, which they have to use in battle, and you have the betrayer card of that leader, you win the combat. It's over, bada boom, and it is an amazing moment in board gaming when someone flips one of those overs. It is so fun. It is so cool. The only other modifier on Dune is that you also can play cards along with your combat wheel. So you turn over your combat wheel, you hide a little lasgun in there, you hide a little shield in there, and then you flip to reveal, and oh my God, he's got a gun. Okay? Need I say more? It's got everything. It really has the sort of structure, the base ness that I was talking about in Blood Rage, where you kind of know what's probably going to happen unless things get weird. And then there are a lot of options in Dune, similar to a game like Cosmic Encounter, that allow things to get weird. That is Dune, my favorite combat mechanism in board games.
Kellen mentioned something when he in that long convoluted answer about how it works in Dune.
It's so quick.
Almost as quick as diplomacy. But he mentioned something was the exploding dice of the Dune combat universe. You know what the exploding dice is of the Chaos and Old World universe? Exploding dice.
No, Mark.
Come on.
Mark, how can you argue against Dune?
Very easily, I just did.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Mark, but I think the treachery card system in Dune is brilliant. And I think that the way that it's this landmine that is just like sitting armed on the other side of the board throughout the entire game. And you know in the back of your head that's possible, but you never think it's probable, and you kind of take the risk, and then it just blows up in your face. And I think that the moments that happens are so incredible in Dune. It also, like, you know, the power bidding system is so reminiscent of Scythe, and I think that the way that it, again, is that trade-off of like how many of these troops am I willing to sacrifice in order to add to my strength. I think
for each brother.
Great system with a cool little twist in the treachery system. I think Dune is the winner for me. Fire away.
All right. Blood Rage makes its triumphant return versus Kellen's Inish.
So the combat in Inish, again, you've seen my philosophy towards combat systems, bias towards quick, bias towards simple. Inish has this sort of war of attrition feeling, and what makes combat in Inish so funny or clever is that it can end at any point, unlike the game of Inish, which sometimes can go too long. In a combat in Inish, if you want to, if everybody wants to, you can stop. We can just stop.
I thought we were having
coexist.
Combat.
What?
I thought we were having combat. What, were we just talking
The
here?
combat ends, okay? It also has other funny bits, like if you have combat where there's a festival, someone loses a troop to begin because you shouldn't be having combat during festival, okay? But no, the combat system actually, I think, is brilliant. If I have 3 troops and you have 2 troops, you have to lose one. But if you want to, you can discard one of your green cards in order to not lose that troop. And anyone who's played Inish knows you do not have very many green cards, so you do not make a decision like that lightly. You lose a troop. And then Neelan's like, can we just coexist? And I say, no, we're carrying on. And then I have to lose a troop. And then Neelan has to lose a troop until there is only one player left in that clash, or everyone has agreed to ceasefire. I think it is very novel. I think it is crazy to me how clean it is. I am surprised that it exists and that it doesn't exist in 30 other places. One of the things in my research for this episode is just I don't really like a lot of combat systems. A lot of combat systems are the asterisk with which everything else hangs together that I really enjoy. Inish is very elegant, very novel, and I think worthy of being considered.
There's no chance the Blood Rage is going to win. I already know Neil's going to go.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but I think the thing that it makes Inish combat so fascinating is that it is so unlike every other combat system. It is effectively a negotiation and like a game of chicken, and I think that is just brilliant in and of itself. And coupled with that with the fact that I don't super like Blood Rages, I think this is an easy pick for Inish for me.
Okay, but see, it's not an easy pick for me. I really like Blood Rage's combat. I think it's my near the very tippy top because it combines what you know with a little smidgen of what you don't know, and it's over fast. Like, it's just like it happens. Because I recognize that Blood Rage is a combat game, and it's not your mother's Seven Wonders clone, I pick Blood Rage Fire Away.
Oh, wow. I was going to make fun of Inish, but now I will not because Kellen has been so magnanimous. So Blood Rage makes it through. I will remember that, Kellen. I will remember that.
Thank you. Yeah, a little side alliance.
That's right. All right, so let's continue the side alliance as Inish goes up against Kemet. Neelan, first you break the tie.
Ooh, this is a tough one for me. I think it's Kemet. I think it's Kemet. Like, I do always like those systems. I know that they've been, like, used a lot, but the hand of cards that's whittling down and finding the most opportune time to use your kill card versus your victory card versus your defense card, I think that's great. Coupled with the fact, like I was saying earlier, that it's that consideration of what do I think Mark wants more in this fight. I think Kemet's system is brilliant, and I'll be going Kemet. Fire away.
So, like in the last round, Kellen voted against his game. I owe him one, and I'll be paying that off later because I'm voting for Kemet on this one. Fire away.
Oh, my God.
Okay, here we go. Arcadia Quest versus Rising Sun.
I think that it is really hard to compare some of these things. And the problem for me with Rising Sun is just how long it goes. I think that all of the decisions that you make in it are interesting, but again, like I asked the question, is every part of Rising Sun's combat tense, and does it all feel like combat? And I'm not sure that it does. I'm sure that it's good, and I like Rising Sun, but I think that if I'm saying pure combat systems, I prefer Arcadia Quest personally. Fire away, though. I enjoy Rising Sun.
Yeah, I definitely think Rising Sun's combat system is tense. I get where you're coming from in that it feels more like an auction than a combat system. But if we're saying that this is the system that is the analogy for the game's idea of combat, I don't think that argument holds water for me. I think it's Rising Sun. It's Rising Sun.
I do think that Rising Sun's combat is very tense, especially when you're trying to figure out what your opponent is going to be putting his money on.
Bidding? Did I hear you right? Bidding?
Sure.
With money?
Bidding.
Okay, great.
But exploding dice, and Kellen won, so I'm going Arcadia Quest.
Yeah.
Nice and easy. Pay off the debt. Pay off the debt. Rising Sun versus Mage Knight. I'm very curious to hear what Kellen says on this one.
It just can't even be... It can't... I don't... Yes. Okay. Combat requires multiple participants. Rising Sun, fire away.
All right, Neil, you won't have to vote on this because I'm going to go Rising Sun.
I would pick Rising Sun anyway.
Okay, so it's a sweep.
No, we didn't want to hear your vote, Neelan.
So 2 real quick ones here. 2 quick games. Diplomacy versus Mage Knight. Nice and breezy.
Again, these are so... It's like, how do you even compare what we're talking about? And this may be the most disparate, right? Which is like a 12-hour... 7-player negotiation game versus a cooperative solo
6
game
hour
where you're combating
game.
against a deck of cards.
I actually make it really easy for you. I think diplomacy is the better combat system of these two. Fire away.
That's at least 2 for diplomacy. I won't reveal my vote. Mage Knight versus Neuroshima Hex.
I think that Mage Knight system is really, really clever. And I think it is very particular to me. And I don't expect it, as has been proven out so far, to get a lot of support in this trio. But
I supported you.
Fair enough. But generally speaking, I think it just scratches something particular in my brain, which is, like I said, it's like looking at a chessboard and being like, oh, I'm going to do this, and there's the win. And then once you get that and once you figure it out, it just feels brilliant to execute on. And that's
Neelan,
not that dissimilar.
I'm supporting you.
Hex.
Neelan, I am supporting you. You appealed to my chess side by mentioning the word chess. I hope you don't forget it. So I'm voting for Mage Knight.
I'm very eager to hear what you think when you play this, Mark, because I do think you'll love that side of it. Mage Knight, fire away for me.
Kellen, you want your vote on the record? Or mystery?
Wait, does the monsters in Mage Knight, if there are even, do they fight back?
Yeah, they deal damage to you.
You just made it sound like you solve a chess puzzle and then you move on. It's like...
I mean, yeah, it's.
It didn't sound like there was a big bad guy that you were trying to wail upon.
You fiend Kettle the dragon. That's a little chess joke there, and then you're done.
It's funny because I think the more you say, the more I'm not convinced it's not a combat system. To be clear, but I get where you're coming from. It's not like a back and forth. Yeah.
All right. Now, King of Tokyo.
It's like a riddle, right? A dragon asks you a riddle.
Yeah. And then the dragon says, "You've won the combat."
King of Tokyo versus Neuroshima Hex. Kellen, Tokyo for once in your life.
Okay, Tokyo for once in my life.
That's right.
Have you ever been?
Can you please give the Japanese people some love?
I think Neuroshima Hex is good. Neuroshima Hex is solid, unique, different, based on diplomacy, as you heard it here first. Neuroshima Hex, fire away.
Hex.
Blood Rage versus Dune. Oh, this is going to be Dune. Let's not even kid ourselves. Oh, actually, Kellen?
No, it's Dune fire away for me. But again, I consider these to exist somewhere on a tree together. And it's not exactly the same, but there's just combat wheel with card modifiers that gives me... I don't like rolling dice for combat. It's you haven't seen Root anywhere near any of our lists because what the is going on with the combat in Root? It doesn't feel satisfying. And these games have managed to do it. And I understand where someone who's way into the drafting part of Blood Rage can get got in the combat, and then it feels like all the plans I set up don't work. So I understand why there's a mishmash there a little bit. But I think that in Dune, it just works so wonderfully. For me, it's Dune Fire Away.
Yeah, this is Dune Fire Away for me as well.
All right, but Blood Rage versus Chaos in the Old World.
Okay, Mark, I'm undecided. These are both fantastic.
Okay, so go Blood
Give me-
Rage.
No, just because you say?
Yeah.
Say one sentence about the philosophical meaning of the combat in both games.
Okay. Blood Rage's combat is better than Chaos in the Old World's combat. That's the philosophical
Oh,
meaning.
okay. Blood Rage.
I will say, like, the biggest thing I think probably is the dice rolling. I love the exploding dice, but like you said, Kellen, there is the luck factor that does sometimes bother me when it comes to combat. So that's what I would say with Blood Rage. And I just like the drafting of Blood Rage. I think that's a cool aspect to it.
Yep. And again, and that's in Blood Rage and in Dune. If you want to be a god of combat,
Yes, you can. You
can
probably can.
push hard
Yeah.
for that. And even in Dune, like, people go, oh, the treachery, the betrayal, it's so random. But I always start picking on the player who I have their betrayal cards. So I know that I want to be in combat this game with Neelan more often than not. And so you can assume that if people are picking on you, that they're probably holding some of that heat. And that's like your notice to be warned.
And yet, Dune was not on this battle, so I don't know why Kellen got into that. But so Blood
Well,
Rage
I'm
goes.
campaigning for the number one slot, Mark. You got to think of the war.
All right. So we got Kemet versus Chaos in the Old World. This one's tough for me, two of my own children here, but I think I'd lightly lean to Kemet, but I'm happy to see either of these go through.
I think it would be Kemet for me as well. I
I think it's probably that for me too. So
All right, clean sweep. Moving on. Chaos in the Old World versus Inish. This is definitely Chaos in the Old World for me, but
definitely
I suspect it's not
Inish
going to
for
make it.
me.
Yeah, it's in it for me. It's again, it's so unlike any of the rest.
All right, Kellen, Dune versus Arcadia Quest, to your own.
Yeah, this is like someone is pairing like budget M. Night Shyamalan film versus The Shining or some like really good horror film. Like Dune is wow. Do you see what I'm saying?
I see what you're
Budget
saying.
M. Night Shyamalan versus The Shining.
I see what you're saying, and I
Dune,
really
fire
hope
away.
I really hope Arcadia Quest comes up against one of my games in the near future because I have my put down ready to go. It's Dune for me as well. Arcadia Quest versus Blood Rage. So on one hand you have Blood Rage, and on the other hand you have a cut rate M. Night Shyamalan bad movie. Whichever Shyamalan movie you hate the most, that's Arcadia Quest, according to Kellen, who put it on the list for some reason. So
I picked Blood Rage. You didn't have to stoop so low.
Blood Rage for
Fire
me.
away.
Fire away. Arcadia Quest versus Kemet. What kind of movies do you like?
Yeah. This is like Unbreakable versus The Village for me. So it's
Oh,
it's
God.
Kemet. Fire away.
Kemet, fire
The
away.
Village is way better than that insult.
All right. Arcadia Quest, again, trying to survive here after Kellen has cut its legs off at the knees, versus Inish. And so I am going to go Arcadia Quest here.
It's Inish.
Yeah.
It's got to be.
I think it's going to be Inish from Neelan, too.
Yeah.
It's hard. Arcadia Quest, Inish. Okay, let's keep going.
Yeah.
No one wants me to talk philosophically.
Okay.
I've done it for like hours now at this point.
I, at this point, feel badly for Arcadia Quest, which is continuing to battle versus Chaos in the Old World. This is the battle of exploding dice. This is the battle of
I
exploding dice.
actually think that as exploding dice combat goes, I think Arcadia Quest is just more interesting, right? Because it's
You
exploding
got
dice.
sword dice and shield dice and bow and arrow dice.
Yeah.
Why just have numbers? These are dice. They're not supposed to have shields on them. They're supposed to have pips on them.
And again,
Are
like
they?
it's that personalization factor of this is my gear versus your gear. Like I think it's Arcadia Quest for me.
I think Kellen put the seed in Neelan's head when he said campaign.
It's
all
not.
those
It's not
minutes
just the
ago.
campaign because, like, in the course of a single game, it's how you've built your character versus how I've built my character, and then you throw some exploding dice.
All right. So
and the human skin on the board is satanic. Arcadia Quest, fire away.
all right. The terrible Shyamalan movie wins. So it's Chaos in the Old World versus Rising Sun. Kellen, is it even combat? Kellen, is it even combat?
It's true. It's an auction using money.
Yeah, that's not what we're talking about here. I thought we were talking about combat. So you're going to go Chaos in the Old World, right?
I just think that the combat in Chaos in the Old World is not the good part.
That's where I'm at. Like
Oh my God.
it's
It's good. I really like Chaos in the Old World.
Okay, so what are you voting for?
Rising Sun. It's in Japan.
Oh,
Rising
now it's
Sun,
in
Fire
Japan.
away.
Now it's in Japan. Great. All right, so I think I know where this is going to. Diplomacy versus Chaos in the Old World. I like diplomacy, but I'm still going to go with the Chaos in the Old World.
diplomacy.
I know-
Fire away.
Yeah.
Diplomacy.
Chaos in the Old World versus Mage Knight. Kellen, you put the cards
No,
out.
I mean, honestly, okay, like, I like Chaos in the Old World better. I don't know anything about Mage Knight. It sounds like you're solving riddles with a dragon. And still, like the combat in Chaos in the Old World is not what you come to town for.
Okay.
It's, the Satanism.
Yeah. So you're coming to town for the riddles, for the dragon riddles. That's what you're talking about here?
Chaos in the Old World got replaced by Cthulhu Wars, okay? He took the combat, and it's the worst part of Cthulhu Wars. It's the worst part of Chaos in the Old World. What was my other option again?
Mage Knight. Riddles.
Mage Knight, fire away.
Okay, I'm going to send you a book of riddles, Kellen, since you haven't played Mage Knight.
And you have some heart-raising combat with that book.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. All right, well then, Chaos in the Old World versus Neuroshima Hex.
One of these is very much like diplomacy.
And it doesn't have anything to do with Satanism.
Yeah, exactly.
If Kellen voted for Mage Knight, I can't believe he's not going to vote for Neuroshima Hex.
I think it's Neuroshima Hex. Again, I just don't find that system good.
And yet you were the one who brought in Arcadia Quest from nowhere because of the exploding dice. Good Lord. Okay.
Yeah.
And now King of Tokyo versus Chaos in the Old World.
I would go Chaos in the Old World on this, just because at the very least you have, like, powers which influence combat. Like, I would question whether King of Tokyo's mechanic, which we're all just saying, is the combat system. Like,
and he brought Mage Knight to this fight, so...
I think the King of the Hill system is great. If I would call that the combat system, I don't really know. I don't know, Mark, but I think I'm leaning Chaos in the Old World on this.
Chaos in the Old World, fire away.
Okay. Chaos in the Old World it is. And we have our list. Here we go. From number 12, Eclipse. Number 11.
Oh, really? That wasn't in very many fights.
It got put out of its misery early. Which
that
is what
missile
like
salvo phase will get you every time.
That's right. Number 11 is King of Tokyo. Number 10 is Chaos in the Old World. Number 9, Neuroshima Hex. Number 8, Mage Knight. Number 7, the blazingly fast Diplomacy. Number 6.
Oh, wow, 7?
All the way down to number 7.
I feel like that was winning a lot of fights.
And yet here it is.
Interesting.
7
players.
Number 6, Rising Sun. Number 5, Arcadia Quest. Number 4, Inish. Number 3, Kemet. Number 2, Blood Rage. And the number 1 combat system, Dune.
Love it. You'd love to see it. Dune and Blood Rage. I'm very happy with that.
Yeah. Although I wish you had brought in Rex instead, the superior version, the evolution from Dune.
Yeah.
So that is going to do it for the return of Bob. That is our ranking of the best combat systems around. You can tell us what your favorite combat systems are or what you thought of our ranking at BoardGameBarrage.com/Discord. Go to the channel where we discuss the week's episode, or go visit BoardGameBarrage.com/Wiki and read the latest posting about this week's episode and find out what other episodes where we talked about Dune and Blood Rage and these other games, because that'll link you to the other instances where we've mentioned them. You can find us on all forms of social media. We're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, we're on Twitter, we're on all that stuff. You can contact us directly at boardgamebarrage@gmail.com. We are going to be in Dice Tower West in a couple of weeks, so go to our Discord and go to the conventions and meetup channels there, where we will be talking about meetups that our listeners are doing, and I'm sure we'll be around as well, so that's a fun place to get ready for that convention. And thank you as always to Heart Society for our intro and outro song, What's on Your Mind, Kid. Until next week, goodbye.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Sorry, I am recording locally. Sorry, that's what I was missing. All right, yeah, I'm ready. Oh, wait, we got to push record. No, I'm an idiot. What am I? I don't have anything together.
I'm going to wait for this to go. Okay. Ready? 3, 2, 1. All right.
That is the most in sync we have ever been.
It's funny. Whenever you guys say it's in sync, it feels off to me. It never feels terribly off, but...
Yeah, it was a little bit off to me as well.
Yeah.
I think that you guys must not realize what boy band you're in.
Which... Oh, I see. I didn't get that joke until I was asking about it, and then I realized.
I was going to try to use lyrics from a song, but then I will never get it right. And I was like, is Bye Bye Bye, is that in sync or is that Backstreet Boys?
That's in sync.
I had a very hard time. My personal preference was 98 Degrees as a child.
What?
Was it really?
98 degrees.
That's the Nick Carter, right? Or is that his brother? There's a couple of Carters. No, Nick Carter's the older one. Aaron is the younger one, right? Can't remember.
Who could say?
Who could say?
That's another band, Neelan.
I don't think I remember them. Maybe they didn't make it big in South Africa.
I don't think they did. They were writing the coattails of.
Are they? Excuse me.
Sync. What? Can you name any of their songs? 'Cause
Yeah, I do.
I do.
Yeah. Okay.
I do promise you.
I do cherish you.
Cherish. Yeah, cherish. Okay.
Yeah. What do you mean? I'll play it for you now. We can't get copyright strike for that, can we?
Nobody cares about that anymore.
Yeah, that's a classic. Yeah.
Next halftime show.
A little slower than I remember.
You probably had the dance remix version.
All right.
All
I
right.
do not remember this at all.
Yeah, that's probably for the best. 214? It's definitely 214. The last one was 213. So, fun fact, Jamie Stegmaier said that the combat system in Scythe was modeled after, you know what game?
Dude.
Blood Rage?
Rex. How's that make you feel, Kellen? Rex.
Amazing.
I think we can rest all of our cases. That's the sentence. That's really good. That's so great. That's so awesome.
Where the choices are so trivially. What is it? What's the word?
Trivial or
Trivialized.
Trivially. Okay. Where the decisions are so trivially simple.
Oh, yeah. Mark, this is an idea. Small idea. Imagine if you had a sound that started every round of this. Okay? Like a nice sound,
like
a
pigs.
very pleasant sound.
Like pigs.
What? No, not the pigs. Not the pigs.
Bob. Bob. Bob.